A young girl named Alice wakes up in a white room with a number tattooed on her hand. She's guest 431 of the manor. Here you can have anything you want, as a talking serpent will grant your every wish. However, Alice is interested in getting back outside to the real world. The problem is, the only way out is to pass through all 431 rooms, and the further Alice gets from her own room, the more her body will rot. Bibliomania follows Alice as she makes her way through the manor, encountering the guests and their wishes. Some are funny, some are sad, and some are very disturbing. All the while, Alice's body begins to break down from the rot. Can she make it to room 0 before her body crumbles? Or worse, will she become a victim to one of the disturbed guests and their twisted fantasies? Find out as we do a deep dive into Bibliomania. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and I'm excited for today's video because we're going to cover my favorite obscure manga, Bibliomania. I originally found this one on the Disturbing Manga Iceberg, and it was easily one of the standouts on that whole chart. Don't worry, it's not as fucked up as Child of God, but it does have its share of unsettling moments, mostly in the body horror department. The only thing I don't like about Bibliomania is the fact that it's not officially published in English. Yeah, the copy I have is actually in Spanish. Well, maybe if it gets a little more attention, we'll get the English version eventually. Anyway, get ready for one hell of an adventure with some shocking twists and stellar artwork. This is Bibliomania Explained. Chapter 1. Alice in Phantasmagoria. In a dense city, an explosion lights up the sky. We then see some narration that reads, "I heard a loud sound. I opened my eyes. It would seem the sturdy coffin that sealed me has been broken. I'll leave this coffin and fill my body for the first time in a while." In the center of the city is a massive sphere, and it seems this is the source of the explosion. There's now a massive hole in its side that's smoking. From inside, a giant creature starts to emerge, and the people on the street are running for their lives as the voice continues saying, "I'll eat without thinking of anything. I'll eat and eat and eat." We can see a few men who've taken refuge in a building, only for huge, sinister eyes to look into the window at them. It's an eerie image, especially with the narration ending with the words, "This is my only happiness." This is followed by a beautiful title page showing ships broken to pieces in the nearby ocean and Bibliomania at the top. The letters made up of small characters that would easily fit on a deck of playing cards. These characters are actually seen later in the story, so this page is fun to go back to after you finish. After that ominous opening, it moves into the real story. A bell rings out and a voice declares that a new guest has arrived. On the floor of a completely white room sits up a girl named Alice. She looks up to see only one object in the room, a large door. She looks at her hand and sees the number 431. On the door is the number 430. The door also has a beautiful design covered in an artistic filigree. It's actually a large part of this comic style. You'll notice that some of the buildings and ships earlier had similar patterns on them. With a bemused grin on her face, Alice approaches the door. She reaches for the handle, which has the symbol of a snake on it, when suddenly a disturbing face appears behind her. He welcomes her to his manor and introduces himself as the Serpent, a fitting title as he looks like a large snake with arms and wears a suit. He says it's been a while since he's had a guest and seems delighted at Alice's arrival. He snaps his fingers and summons an armchair out of thin air for Alice to sit in. Then he tells her to wait in this room until the party begins. He says there's going to be a wondrous banquet, but it'll take a little time to prepare. As he speaks, strange symbols can be seen forming behind his teeth, and he tells Alice that as long as she's in this room, she can have anything she desires. Alice's belly rumbles, and to demonstrate what he means, the serpent snaps his fingers and giant strawberries begin raining from the sky. At the same time, massive cakes grow out of the ground like a dessert paradise. The serpent tells her not to leave the room and disappears. It then cuts back to the destroyed city, and we see the words Alice, 5 days until entry, at the top. We can see Alice unfazed walking through the empty streets until she comes upon a small doll. She picks it up and its arm falls off. Suddenly she catches a familiar smell in the air and begins following her nose. Behind her, the doll lay on the street with a butterfly resting on it. Okay, so maybe this is before Alice entered the serpent's manor. Back in room 431, Alice has had her fill of desserts. In fact, the giant plates are basically empty, so she really went to town, I guess. Well, out of boredom, I guess, she once again approaches the door to room 431. She opens it up and begins to walk through when she feels a sharp pain on her hand. Her skin looks like it's rotting or something, and as she investigates, the serpent appears screaming at her and pulls her back into her own room. He tells her that if she leaves, her body will begin to rot, and the further she gets, the worse the effects are. He goes on to explain more about the manor, how there are 431 guests and 431 rooms. For every new occupant, a new room is added, and that's how it's always been since the beginning, a long time ago. He says that one day when room 666 is added, the manor will be complete, and they can all celebrate with a big party. He adds that any guest attending the party will not be able to leave the manor for all of eternity. He considers this a good thing since here you can have literally anything you can imagine. It's so much better than the outside world, which is full of suffering and conflict. Alice furrows her brow and says there are good things out there too, you know. She then throws a quick tantrum saying she doesn't want to go to the party, she wants to go home. It almost seems like the serpent looks right at us and calls her a silly girl. He informs her that there is one way to leave. If you wish to return to the outside world, you'll have to get to the very first room to be made in the manor, room 000. Alice immediately jumps towards the door before the serpent can finish. He grabs her by the collar and continues, saying that in order to get there, she would have to make her way through all 430 rooms, which is a problem because, as he mentioned, the further she gets from her room, the more her body will rot. But here, she'll be just fine, and as proof, Alice looks at her hand to find that it's healed back to normal. By the time she would make it to the exit, however, the rot would consume her entire body and she would die. As the serpent continues his warnings, Alice slowly sneaks off toward the door once again and simply says, "I guess that means I gotta hurry." She opens the door and the serpent tells her point blank that she'll regret this. It then cuts back to the broken city once again, this time saying 4 days until entry. Alice casually walks through the wreckage with a smile, sniffing the air to find the source of the smell. Eventually, she stands on a massive gun near the beach and declares that she's found what the smell is. The gun here is really interesting and suggests that this is either a futuristic or alternate world because of the difference in technology. There's something about the design that kind of reminds me of Full Metal Alchemist. But let's move into Chapter 2, The Trials of Room 430. Back in the manor, Alice steps into room 430. Her hand immediately begins rotting, but she pays it no mind and actually sings a cheery nursery rhyme as she walks. She finds herself in the middle of a town in feudal Japan, and a voice rings out saying that the court is now in session. A giant mechanical samurai comes out and sits at the top of some steps, asking for the sinner to come forth. Luckily, he's not referring to Alice, but an unfortunate teen in a school uniform whose head is covered by a large block. Two mechanical men bring him before the giant and tell him to confess his sins. The blockhead admits that he bullied a classmate and drove him to suicide. Whoa. Well, the samurai judge follows up by asking, why did you abuse him? Surprisingly, the teen on trial admits that he did it because it was fun, even saying that his victim was a pussy bitch. We get a glimpse of the bullying, although in this flashback, the student still has the block on his head. He's forced his classmate to strip to his underwear, and this sicko sits on him like a human chair. It's actually worse than that. He puts a bottle under the kid's forehead for support, which must hurt like hell. Eventually, his victim can't support his head any longer, and the weight breaks the bottle, making them both topple over. The bully is pissed and says that he had no right to stop being a chair. After some physical abuse, the bully pulls his phone out to get a photo of his victim, laughing the whole time. Damn, this got really dark. The judge asks if it was really that fun, and before the guy can answer, the mechanical men cut off his head. This happens so quickly it actually surprised me. Alice, as usual, is unfazed, just watching this unfold with curiosity. The serpent shows up and says that this is no place for children and yanks her up with his coiled tail. The judge then has the next sinner come to trial, and it seems like it's the same guy. The serpent tells Alice that ever since this guest came to the manor, he's been killing the same person over and over again. Just then, the block-headed bully is beheaded once more. It's become clear now that the samurai is the bullied student, and he rages out, screaming that he's not a chair while beheading his tormentor over and over again. Apparently, he's done this for years, and we can see him raging out at the bully, saying, "How about you be my chair, asshole?" From further away, we can now see that the thousands of heads he's chopped off have formed formed a sort of chair under him. It's a great revenge tale, except for the fact that it sounds like a miserable existence living in bitterness for all of eternity like this. The mechanical swordsmen around are laughing maniacally and look pretty disturbing. The samurai not only judges his bully, but everyone else who sat there and watched doing nothing. In the end, he wants to kill everyone, making this area a lot less safe for Alice. Just as the mechanical men slash at Alice with their swords, the serpent grabs her again, yanking her to safety. Behind them, there's a pretty wild panel of the samurai slashing up hundreds of victims and crying out that it'll never be enough for his chair. At this point, it's clear that Alice needs to leave, so she presses on to the next room. Chapter 3: The Bird of 413 and the Hero of 385. In the past, Alice, now 3 days from entry, jumps from the massive gun and to the rocky beach below without taking any fall damage. She continues sniffing and says it's close. Alice walks through another door and finds herself falling upward into the sky, eventually landing on something soft above. The serpent appears and tells her that the occupant of this room wished to become a bird, and we can see that Alice landed on the bird's back. It's huge and has a human face, which is kind of creepy, but beautiful at the same time. This guest wanted to be free from the meaningless borders drawn across the ground and to be free of the conflicts of man. So she became a bird, soaring through the sky and forgetting she was ever human. The serpent asks Alice if she truly wishes to return to the outside world, and she answers with a smile, "You bet." At this point, her arm is pretty unsightly, rotted into a twisted, mutated mess. As the bird continues flying through the heavens, the serpent reveals that he himself has never seen reality. The system forbids him from leaving the manor, but listening to his guests has made him think. For a human to leave this place is to let go of great happiness. Alice says that that may be true, but she doesn't want a world built on her own lies. Instead, she'd rather experience the itty-bitty happiness of the real world. The great bird flies past a moon, atop of which sits the next door. Alice jumps off towards it, declaring that she hates lies. She waves goodbye to the bird and the serpent and enters the next room. Alice, 2 days until entry, walks along the beach. In the water are many more large guns, some twisted and broken. She continues searching among the wreckage along the coast for whatever it is she wants, and it cuts back to the manor. It's clear that we aren't going to see every room of the manor, as Alice is now at room 385. It makes sense though, this would be the longest manga ever if that were the case. As she enters, we get another glimpse of her rotted arm, and it now has bits of feathers sticking out of it. It's almost like it's been taking on some of the other guests' characteristics. It's also now up to her shoulder. Alice takes 2 steps into the room when a huge alien monster lands right next to her. She just grins at it, not concerned at all, and it goes in for the kill. Just before it smashes her face in, a person moves in with amazing speed to save her. He's a superhero with a metallic exosuit. Kinda looks like Ida from My Hero Academia. He talks all dramatic, calling the alien an evildoer, then introduces himself as Space Mobile Suit Prince Ericrom. After this theatrical moment, he looks over at Alice, who clearly doesn't know who he is. The alien leaps at him, but Ericrom pauses it like a video game and turns back to Alice, still shocked that she hasn't heard of him. He explains that he's from a best-selling comic book. He unpauses the creature and turns around to slash it in half with his energy sword. Nearby, a giant slug creature opens up its sides to reveal more aliens, and it launches them out like pods. It's actually some cool creature design here, a mashup of biology and technology. Anyway, the aliens surround Alice and the hero, and strangely enough, they're yelling things at him like work and get married. Ericrom does a super move, rapidly slashing around and exterminating them in a flash. As soon as he does, a bunch of hot bikini babes come running out to surround him. Alice is just casually watching this whole thing and calls it cliche. Suddenly, a massive alien creature shows up like a boss fight, saying he's going to reduce the galaxy to dust. Ericrom decides to take on such a foe, he'll need to do a suit swap, and for a brief moment, we see who he really is, a severely overweight balding man in his underwear. This is the guest of 385, and it's obvious what his wish is. He changes into a suit with a blaster cannon, looking cool as ever, when Alice says, "You're not exactly young, are you?" Her speech bubble strikes him through the chest and hits him for 999 damage. Okay, now that's funny. The giant alien mocks him, saying he can't even handle the words of a little girl, and then calls the hero his pathetic son, saying, "Leave your room, do some work, get married." And we can see a glimpse of what the guest's life was like in the real world. world, him sitting in front of a computer monitor surrounded by aerochrome figures and posters. He yells out at the alien, a representation of his father, demanding that he respect him. They battle it out, and aerochrome deals the final blow, destroying the beast. In the rubble, Alice spots the door to the next room. A ton of bikini babes come running out to surround the hero and kiss him, and Alice gives him an uneasy look before leaving. I love this chapter because of how it slips into being a comedy for a few minutes, even though ultimately the guest backstory is still pretty sad. Chapter 4, The Dining Table of Room 285. We cut back to Alice one day until entry, and she's still searching the beach. She looks into a huge destroyed tank and seems to find something. It looks like a book that's been chained shut. She sniffs it and says it smells like her little brother. Then walking back toward the destroyed city, she says, "Let's go home." In the manor, we get a montage of various rooms as Alice makes her way through. Room 366 has a guest smoking multiple cigars at once with smoke coming out of his eyes. 359 is full of instruments and music, and in 339, the guest has made himself a tree and become one with nature. As she continues to travel, we can see the rot growing across Alice's body, now reaching the back of her head. Room 330 seems to be a massive orgy. In 324, the guest is traveling the universe as a spaceman. In room 298, the guest has made himself a huge baby playing with toys, and the guest of 306 has made himself immensely rich. Alice enters room 285 and mentions that her body is heavy as lead on account of the rot spreading so badly. It's actually one of the most disturbing moments so far. The rot on the back of her head produces the full snout of a dog. It pokes out from her hair and breathes heavily. It's really off-putting. This room is the most normal that she's entered. It appears to be just a house. Eventually, she comes upon the dining room where she sees a family eating dinner. A husband, his wife, and their son. They question who Alice is, and she tells them she's heading for the outside world. She asks if they'd like to come with her, and the father is immediately enraged. He yells at her for barging into his house and calls her a brat. The serpent appears and points out how bad the rot has taken over her body, calling it desire poison. He also says that this guest would never accept her offer to leave. In the real world, he was a teacher, teaching logic and ethics to children. Ironically, his family was far from the ideal that he taught. His wife was distant and his child was a total brat. This contradiction between his doctrine and reality crushed him. We can see a creepy image of his students pointing at him and questioning his own ethics. This drove the man to drinking, and he fell victim to the curse of time. In a sort of symbolic retaliation, the man picks up a clock and throws it into an hourglass, shattering it and sending gears, bolts, and sand onto the floor. In room 285, the man now serves up plates of the sand and clock parts to his family for dinner. It's really bizarre and quite unsettling, but in this place without time, he'll never grow old, his family will never leave him, and they are perfect in every way, in line with his own brand of ethics. Here, he can have a perfect life. Even so, the man chews on the clock pieces, making horrible noises, and Alice questions if this can really be called life. Even more disturbing, some of the metal pieces pierce through the father's cheeks and blood runs down his face. Alice moves on through the next door. Chapter 5, The Bog of 276. In another flashback, Alice, now 10 seconds before entry, sits on her bed and breaks open the locks around the book. Its covers bear resemblance to the doors in the manor, and she begins to open it. When she does, it floats into the air and all the pages flutter. The seconds count down, and before you know it, Alice is sucked into the book. This seems to confirm that the manor is actually this book, and these flashbacks were leading up to Alice appearing in room 431. Inside, she's not looking too hot. The rot is now moving onto her face, and she's walking slowly through room 276, which is covered in thorny roses. The occupant in this room is a beautiful woman who continually stares at herself in the mirror. She asks Alice why she insists on returning to the real world when there is nothing there but pain. Alice tries to argue with her, but the woman cuts her off and asks her if she knows what it's like to fear death every night. She compares it to drowning in a bog. Here, she can remain beautiful forever. Alice asks her if she had a family. Was no one there for her? This really sets the woman off, and she yells at Alice to quit her nonsense. Her face has rapidly changed to that of a decrepit old woman, and thorns grow out of her face. In reality, this woman feared death, and aging horribly, was kept in a hospital waiting to die. Her family disdained her for having to foot the medical bills. She eventually escaped the hospital and wandered into the woods, planning to hang herself. However, as she puts the rope around her neck, she looks over and sees the book. As she explains this to Alice, the thorns on the roses begin to cut her, water and fill the room with blood to the point that it's waist deep. The woman says in this room she can live forever and reveals her face to be nothing but a skull now. Alice is silent and turns towards the door, wading through the blood. The skull-faced woman laughs ominously as Alice exits to the next room. Outside, we can see the book sitting on Alice's bed, and up above, a hole in the ceiling that looks exactly like the one made in the giant sphere from the beginning of the comic. In a slow zoom out, it's revealed that the bed rests on top of thousands of objects and artifacts from all across history, like a bizarre collection of everything that's ever existed. At the bottom, dozens of people are tied up and blindfolded, screaming for help. What the hell is happening here? Chapter 6, The Tombstone of 268 and The Researcher of 255. Breathing heavily, Alice makes her way through the manor. At this point, almost her entire body is rotting and transformed as she steps into room 268. It consists of hundreds of paper strips with symbols on them, like ribbons of information. The serpent stands inside as if waiting for her. He tells her that this room's occupant was like her and sought to reach room 0, or more accurately, page 0. He reaches out his arms and says that this is all that remains of him, waves of information in a sea of data. His soul became words after his body crumbled, and now they reside here. There's a beautifully disturbing image of Alice, half of her face now rotted with tentacles growing out of it. It's a really gorgeous panel. The serpent once again warns her that if she proceeds, she'll end up like this. However, Alice says nothing and continues to the next door. The serpent ponders what drives her. What is it that she wants in the outside world? She leaves and he calls her foolish, saying that she has no idea that room 0 was never made to be reachable. He gets pissed off, impatiently waiting for the book to reach page 666 and having to fulfill these ridiculous wishes for humans. He ends by saying something kind of ominous. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice. It cuts back to the people who are tied up outside and they start screaming that it's coming back. The beast has come. Alice wakes up in room 255 and curiously, she's completely back to normal without any rot. She finds herself in a large glass chamber like a test tube. Soon, a creepy-ass scientist peers in at her and presses a button which sends her through a long series of tubes before spitting her out. The scientist tells Alice that thanks to her, he's got some great data now. Several more similar-looking scientists surround her and he says that he cloned himself in order to analyze the book from every possible angle. So I guess these aren't other scientists, but rather odd-shaped clones. We get a zoom out of the lab, which is massive and complicated, but there's a lot of data to process after all. The scientists say they found her at the entrance, collapsed and ready to die, but he injected her with a drug that he developed that suppresses the rot, although it only works once. They all laugh creepily while staring at her, and then the scientist says he'll explain the secret of the book that they're all in. Weirdly enough, the top of one of the clone's heads pops off and his brain jumps out with arms and legs, and it runs around like a dog playing with Alice. Weird, but cute. It rests on Alice's head and its eyes project a screen on the wall. The scientist uses this like a PowerPoint presentation and says that once the manor or book reaches 666 people, it will bind all of their flesh and souls together, merging into a being of great power. This is the party the serpent speaks of. For every wish that's granted, the occupants become more insane and they grow further away from their neighbors and the outside world. It makes them stay in their rooms and rots away their desire to escape. The scientist pulls down his eyelid to show the room number on his eye. Every occupant has this somewhere on their body. He goes on to explain that the book also has a system in place that makes reaching page 0 impossible. The book is designed so that the lower the page number, the faster the body rots. Those in rooms below 100 can't even enter their neighbors' rooms without crumbling completely. All the scientists bunch up together in a creepy panel and laugh, telling Alice that she'll never make it to page 0 and warn her not to go any further. Alice just smiles and asks them a question. How can they tell which scientist was the original? All at once they answer, me of course, and point to themselves, which sends them all into a furious argument and they start fighting over who's the original. As they do, Alice keeps on smiling and walks into the next room. Chapter 7, Run Towards Death. We get another montage of the rooms that Alice is running through, although the guests and their wishes have become completely unhinged and disturbing. The further she goes down, the longer the guests have been there, which has slowly made them go insane. And their wishes are a body horror nightmare, as they twist into deformed shapes. At the same time, Alice's body has begun rotting away again at a much faster pace this time. In fact, the rot has completely covered her body and turns her into something of a body horror exhibit of her own. In one of the standout panels of the manga, we see her running full blast while her face has taken a twisted and grotesque form. Once again, the art here is stellar. The serpent appears and wonders if the maddening pain has crushed her mind yet. She just leaps over him and runs to the next door, rapidly passing through the rooms while her body becomes less and less human. Eventually, she gets to room 100, remembering what the scientist said about those that travel to the pages below. Still, she enters room 99, and immediately her body rots severely and starts to crumble, collapsing to the ground like a broken husk. The serpent arrives and declares her dead before laughing maniacally. He gleefully says that this is the result of those who seek to escape. You'll only die and turn into words. However, as he goes on his "I told you so" rant, Alice seems to move, and out from her deformed shell of a body, her human fingers poke through. Alice then stands up out of the crumbled shell like a cicada shedding its skin, and she fully emerges looking completely fine. Chapter 8, Guests. Back to her normal self, she looks up at the serpent with her big eyes and begins walking forward. The serpent is stunned and can't make any sense of it. Alice simply smiles as she passes him and then breaks into a full sprint towards the next room. As soon as she gets through the door, her body instantly rots into another broken shell, but Alice simply leaps out from the shell, once again fully renewed. The serpent watches in shock as Alice moves with beast-like speed through the rooms, constantly rotting and reviving over and over. He tries to understand it. Is this a system error? Does she somehow possess an immortal body? Whatever it is, he says he can sense the candle of her life going out. There's no question that she's dying hundreds of times over. Finally, Alice reaches the final door, to room 000. As she walks into the room, she steps out of another dead husk, renewed again. In the room is another door with a magnificent structure around it. The serpent says that this is the table of contents, and he demands Alice tell him how it's possible that she got here. Alice starts to walk towards the final door, and at the same time she speaks, saying, "Once upon a time, in a certain island country." The serpent interrupts her, and she just smiles at him, saying, "We'll continue this later." And then she enters the last door. As she walks through, the number 431 dissolves from her hand, and she disappears. From the doorway, strange symbols appear like that of what we saw in the serpent's mouth before. Up above are hundreds of lights representing the many rooms. The ones with occupants are lit up. Of course, room 431 goes out. As the serpent rages out over Alice, the light of room 431 suddenly lights back up. Could it be Alice? Did she somehow return? Then the remaining rooms rapidly begin to fill, and all the lights are blinking on until finally all the rooms up to 666 are occupied. The serpent is shocked and elated at what he's seeing. The manor is now full, and the serpent's eyes shine white. Chapter 9, Banquet. The long wait is over at last, and massive cables with symbols on them burst from the structure and into the serpent as he screams out that the party has begun. He seems to take on a more sinister shape as the cables fill his body with, I'm not sure what. The serpent disappears onto the floor and arrives at room 666. The guest has just arrived and stands up in surprise as the demented serpent lunges at him, devouring the man whole. After doing so, the serpent grows more arms and moves to the next room to consume another meal. He travels rapidly through the rooms, eating their occupants, the new arrivals as well as some familiar faces from the rooms that Alice visited, like the bullied student. In the outside world, the book still sits upon Alice's bed, and it begins to glow with sparks shooting out. It floats into the air, fluttering violently, and the guests of the many rooms can feel the effects, including the scientist, and he realizes that the feast has begun and that the serpent is arriving. As he and his clones are sucked into the great beast's mouth, he says, "O serpent, enjoy reality to your heart's content," as if he knows something that the serpent doesn't. The serpent continues onward after consuming every guest and jumps through the door in room 0. In the outside world, we can see the serpent's twisted form manifesting into reality from the book. It is a hell of a sight, like a Dali painting mixed with Junji Ito. Now a massive beast, he bursts through the dome in the city, emerging as basically a kaiju. Chapter 10, Remembrance. The serpent, now a towering monstrosity, sees his reflection in a nearby building and is pleased to finally enter the real world. He starts crushing buildings just for the thrill of interacting with something real, I suppose. And then he notices that nobody is here and he's alone. In a sort of rage, he conjures up an energy blast, ripping the city up even more, and demands that the humans come out to worship him. Then from nearby, he can hear someone singing a nursery rhyme. A young girl appears atop a crumbled skyscraper, and it is none other than Alice, and it looks like she's ready to tell the serpent the rest of her story. Once upon a time, in a certain island country, there lived a unforgetful princess. The girl was terribly ill and couldn't go outside, so instead instead she read. Possibly because of her strange illness or because she was born with it, she had a peculiar memory. Once she'd seen or read something, she would never forget it, like an extreme photographic memory. Because of this, she could absorb information at a blinding speed. She had books ordered from all over the world and of every genre until she had a library full of them and became obsessed with knowledge. She wanted to know as much as possible about the world that she couldn't see with her own eyes. She wanted to know everything, the whole truth of the world. Eventually, she made plans to create the book to end all books. Here we see the construction of some bizarre and enormous device that seems to be channeling energy into the book, and the princess named this book that contained all knowledge the Book of Truth. We can see her reach out and grab the book, which begins to transform her into a giant hideous beast. She immediately begins turning the servants into words and consuming them. The book automatically transcribes all human memories and emotions, and so the princess and the book were now one, turning humans into knowledge and storing them within herself. Now we know what all the massive guns were for, as the humans attempt to fight off this monstrosity that was laying waste to the population. They built a massive gun that could shoot biblioclastic rounds imbued with concentrated magic, using ribbons of knowledge to seal the beast in a large tomb. The very same sphere that was cracked open at the beginning, and if you hadn't pieced it together, Alice is the princess and she was the beast sealed within the sphere. I would have never expected the manga to go this route, but man, I love the world building here. Plus, biblioclastic ammunition is such a wild and creative concept. Chapter 11, The Great War. The war against the princess had ended and the people celebrated. As the years passed, the population grew and a city was built around the prison. As time went on, so did technology, and using the princess's research notes, scientists were able to create their own copies of the Book of Truth with lower page counts to be used in war. Here we can see a creature that looks like the serpent being fused into the book, and looking at its cover, it's clear that this is the very one that the serpent emerged from. Despite making copies, these were inferior knockoffs that couldn't even decipher words that they'd eaten, but they were powerful enough to be useful for the human army, until their research facility was bombed, burning up most of the books. A few lucky copies survived and were scattered across the globe. Time passed again, and soon the humans forgot about the Book of Truth that they had put to sleep. Then, nearly 150 years after the Great War had ended, the Book of Truth opened up once again. We can see the sphere crack open and an obscured monster break free and start consuming humans after turning them into words. The public freaks out and tries to figure out what's going on, but the internet is flooded with bad information and theories, making it hard to know what to believe or who to trust. As Alice tells the story, she laughs about how, in the end, they're the same as her, looking for information in order to live. There's a great 2-page spread of Alice in a massive Cthulhu-like form destroying the city. With no other option, the human military recycled some of the biblioclastic rounds from a bygone era and fired them once again at the beast. However, this time, it did nothing to the book, who had already eaten plenty, and so the second war ended with the book gaining victory. In the present, Alice explains how she got so many people to enter the manor so quickly. She says that she just forcefully showed the serpent to her food. We get a glimpse once again to all the people tied up at the bottom of the sphere, and can see Alice showing them the serpent book, which absorbs them. Because she used up so many of these people, she had to get more food elsewhere, which is why the city is empty. The serpent silently stares at her, and she asks him, "Did you really think you were the only book? Did you think you were special?" The serpent starts raging out, screaming for her to stop. It slashes at her with its massive tail, but she just laughs and casually jumps out of the way. Then she transforms into a creature herself. Her shadow dwarfs the serpent, and when we finally get a look at her, she can only be described as glorious. 10 times bigger than the serpent, she still looks like Alice, but in an adult form, and also resembles that of a butterfly. It's a very cool design. Chapter 12, Sunset. Alice says she was aware of the serpent's existence, and she entered knowingly because she wanted to see what was inside her worthless little brother, and nothing more. She starts laughing at him, and he runs away while the towering Alice walks slowly behind him. She then says, "Let's review." A book with far more than 666 pages was made, a book incomparably greater. As Alice speaks, she transforms into the Lovecraftian monstrosity once again, and with her mouth splitting open to reveal jagged teeth, she says that this book consumes souls even now, adding more pages to it. The serpent falls to the ground as the all-powerful Book of Truth closes in on him with her many arms, ultimately trying to absorb him along with all the information within. The serpent cries out in agony, but Alice says to rejoice, he will live on in her records. Finally, the serpent's belly bursts open and all the information within him, including the guests, come flowing out. In a beautiful few panels, the souls of all the characters we met along the journey turn into words, as Alice takes them in, saying she won't forget even the tiniest, most insignificant wavering of the serpent's heart. With his last breath, he asks her, what good will recording all this information be if all life ceases to exist? She admits that it's most likely meaningless, but she has to. The serpent is stripped of almost everything, and only a skeleton remains. Alice finishes by saying that this is her only happiness. She finishes absorbing the serpent and turns back into a little girl looking over the destroyed city as the sun sets. She says she has to consume the souls of man, adding more words, although there's no one left to read them now. We get a glimpse of the doll in the empty street with the butterfly on it. And that is the end of Bibliomania. Yeah, this was a wild ride, and while it's not as surreal or interpretive as something like Spa, it does get pretty complicated by the end and can be unclear exactly what's going on. So first I'll break down what actually happened here in chronological order, and then we can talk about theories and possible themes behind Bibliomania. So let's break it down. Alice was originally a sick girl whose illness left her unable to venture to the outside world, so instead she learned about it by reading. Due to an almost supernatural ability to absorb information, she sought to make the ultimate book that held all possible information, and using the technology and magic of her world, crafted the Book of Truth. She fused with the book and began to absorb people and all of their knowledge, quickly growing into a godlike entity, consuming millions of people until the military crafted a weapon that could at least keep her at bay and locked her in a massive sphere-like prison. After hundreds of years of slumber in this prison, she eventually broke free and began terrorizing the population once more. Only this time, she won the battle and essentially consumed every human. While she was dormant, the humans used her research to make copies of the Book of Truth to use as weapons of war. But in an attack, they were all burned except for a few copies. One of these surviving books was the Serpent. Alice searched the city until she found this copy and willingly entered it, appearing in room 431 and making her way through the book out of curiosity in her quest for knowledge. As essentially an immortal being, she beat the system and survived long enough to look through every room of the Serpent's Manor and leave out of room 0. On the outside, she used the Serpent's book to absorb her captive humans, filling the remaining pages and completing it. With this, the Serpent consumed the souls of the manor and emerged into the real world as a godlike being himself. However, he was an inferior copy. Alice easily defeated him, and ever hungry for knowledge, she then consumed the newly transformed being and all of the guests inside. It seems that Alice only allowed him to transform out of curiosity, and by completing the book, she could gain new information. However, she's now left with an almost empty world and no one left to read the Book of Truth. That about sums it up. It's actually still unclear whether she consumed the entire world's population or just this city, and on top of that, the Serpent's book wasn't the only one to survive. It mentions that the others were scattered around the world. So I imagine next, Alice will track down these other copies, or as she calls them, her little brothers and sisters, and do the same thing to them as she did to the Serpent, allowing them to transform before absorbing them. I could easily imagine a sequel where Alice tracks down the other books, or even better, an anthology series that focuses on some of the rooms we never got to see in the manor. There's a lot of possibilities there, so I really hope this manga gains more popularity online. Now let's talk about some of the themes and meaning behind this book. I can't find the author themselves explaining what it's really about, but I kind of prefer that because it makes it more open to interpretation. Probably the most common takeaway from readers seems to be escapism and the theme of desire versus reality. In the manor, the guests can have anything they wish for, but they often become fixated on the troubles of their past lives in the real world. While they use their wishes to make perfect realities for themselves, these wishes keep them stuck wallowing in bitterness, envy, and revenge. In the real world, we're forced to work through problems in order to move forward in life, but ironically, the manor's guests seem to never conquer their demons. Instead, they create realities focused around them. Another major theme is obsession with knowledge. This is sort of where the title comes into play. Bibliomania is the excessive collecting or even hoarding of books to the point where social relations or health are damaged. Alice was obsessed with seeing the outside world, and her only outlet was reading about it. Eventually, she does see it, but ironically becomes a monster in the process. Instead of experiencing the real world, she instead analyzes it through words, and by doing so destroys the very thing she wanted to experience so badly. To me, this is a warning about the limits of knowledge and its contrast with actually living. There's a great quote by be white. Explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process. Now, obviously this quote is about humor, but I often relate it to life itself. For instance, you can read everything there is to know about a dog by reading books, but none of that knowledge will let you experience what it's like to play fetch or rub a dog's belly. Finally, I think there's an interesting analogy in Bibliomania regarding technology and the internet. When Alice emerges in the modern day and starts wreaking havoc, no one knows what's true or what to do because of the overload of online information. This is obviously a real problem as information gets harder and harder to verify, especially when you throw AI into the mix. What's interesting is that Bibliomania was originally published in 2016 from what I can tell, but this sequence of people panicking online eerily mirrors the breakdown of information that happened in 2020 and after, somewhat predicting the dangers of too much information. Anyway, I could dissect this book to death, but I'm curious what you guys think. What did you get out of it? Let me know in the comments. Shout out to Kilman Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends.